DLSS 4.5 has been out since CES, and I've come back from CES and looked over the last 1.5 weeks, and I have some findings. And to discuss these findings today, I'm using John Linneman as a sounding board. How you doing there, John?
Yeah, so you're using John Linneman preset C right now, so hopefully this goes smoothly as planned. But yes, DLSS has continued to evolve in some interesting ways. And based on what we're seeing here, there's definitely some major improvements to be found, but also some odd regressions that you found. So I think we'll get into all of that in this video. You know this view, you've seen it hundreds of times on DF Direct Weekly, but just out of frame here, there's a whole other world happening. This is the side you never see, the working side. This is where my monitors and general workspace live day in and day out. And over the last month, it has evolved thanks to the FlexiSpot E7 Pro, which has quietly become the backbone of my entire DF setup. When FlexiSpot approached us, I already had my eye on one of these desks, and I'm pleased to see that it ticks off exactly all the checkboxes I needed. Yes, it's a motorized standing desk, something I've already used for years, but as display sizes increased, stability became a real issue. With the E7 Pro, even at full height, it barely moves, which is important when you're dealing with, well, Digital Foundry grade hardware. The E7 Pro is rated for a load capacity up to 160 kilograms, so this thing barely registers. When I have the urge to put the FW900 back on the desk, it's ready. There's a wide range of table sizes too. This 180 centimeter tabletop perfectly handles a large 45-inch ultra-wide monitor, as you can see here. I'm also a fan of the control panel with the presets and USB-C charging on the side. Plus, it's a whole lot faster going up and down than my previous desk. It also has proper cable management down here, which, as you might expect, is pretty important. I run a lot of different hardware on my desk and was easily able to organize my cables, mount a sizable power strip, and tuck away some power bricks. So yeah, you always see this view on DF Direct, but behind the scenes, the FlexiSpot E7 Pro is doing the heavy lifting. If you want to check it out, head over to FlexiSpot.com and use the code YTE730 to save. So my very first question for you, Alex, is we're currently reaching the M model, right? So what happens when they reach Z or Z? Like, where do we go next?
There's a lot of places where DLSS still can improve, and you can kind of see that versus the K model from last year. Now, over the last year since DLSS 4 launched, and now we're on 4.5 with this preset M, I've been looking at preset K over the year. And after my initial review, there's been areas where over time we've been able to see that there are actually weak points in that model, that preset K model. And so I came looking at DLSS 4.5, I came to it looking at those areas where the K model had regressions, as I'll call them, and see how this preset M improves upon them. And one of the ones that I think a lot of people talked about, and that I also covered in a couple of games, is that if you looked like in this area here in Assassin's Creed Shadows, if you look into areas where there's volumetric fog, that DLSS 4.0, that preset K, it could have like nice looking edges, but if you looked into the fog, you could see that there was a kind of horizontal, or sometimes in some games, vertical lines. Like you'd see a banding showing up. And also any of the things moving through fog would kind of have like these ghosty shadows behind them. And you can see that occasionally here when stuff like leaves blow in front or in between or behind the fog, and it kind of shows up there. So comparing to preset M here, which is DLSS 4.5 at 4K DLSS performance mode, we can say that both of those issues, the banding in the fog and the ghosting shadows, are gone. And based upon my experience with other games, this appears to be universal behavior. So this doesn't happen apparently in any games anymore. So that's a pretty good thing. Another thing that you could see that I noticed over the course of the year with DLSS 4 preset K is like you can see here in Horizon Forbidden West. So it had much better motion like adaptation. It could show detail on the move much better, but one of the issues that it had when doing so is that when stuff would move, sometimes the area behind the thing moving or the surface of the area thing moving could have a slight pixelated pattern to it. Now, this is disocclusion fizzle, as you may call it, but it's not as bad as the disocclusion fizzle as we saw in FSR.
Yeah, that's the worst.
I'll put those side by side right now. You'll see that they look really different. But the CNN model didn't have that. It was just a lot blurrier and didn't show detail. But arguably, you'd want kind of a best of both worlds there, where it doesn't have this fizzle, but at the same time is high detail. So if you compare to preset M here, you actually can see pretty well that it almost reaches a best of both worlds kind of scenario. The preset M doesn't show on the surface of objects like Aloy's back, pouches, or her quiver, or the area surrounding the quiver. It doesn't show any of that kind of like little pixel edge detail anymore inside the surfaces. Rather, it's much smoother and anti-aliasing is preserved and things like that.
There was another thing I noticed sometimes with preset K, specifically in Cyberpunk, where like certain types of detail when moving quickly through the environment, like in a car, near the car, would kind of lose some detail. And I'm curious if they actually managed to solve that problem.
Yeah, so this is another one I looked at that I kind of discussed over the course of the year in various videos. And looking at preset Hem here side by side with preset K, it doesn't have that issue anymore. So the texture along the side of the road of this car doesn't kind of smear in the direction of the cars moving. Rather, it just looks kind of normal. So that was a regression versus the CNN model that isn't there anymore. So the things that were worse with the K model do at least now look generally better.
It was always weird in Cyberpunk because when you drove in third person, it almost made it look like there was lines coming from the top corners of your vehicle, like you were like carving a path through the texture, almost. And now, it just looks regular. So, okay, so that's good. They fixed all that stuff, but there were a few things where we saw Model K of the Transformer model that actually weren't really, or the Transformer model in general, that weren't actually an improvement over the CNN model. And I think one of the big ones actually was Forza Horizon 5, which was a tricky one as well, because that originally was an MSAA based game. And even though the MSAA had plenty of issues with in-surface aliasing and whatnot, it still produced some very clean results in other aspects. And DLSS, the different iterations of DLSS have been kind of hit or miss in certain spots there. So, like, what are we looking at here with the Model M?
So now with preset Model M, the big area before was essentially the game could look pretty good with DLSS on, but as soon as anything was really thin and small, like power lines in the game, they would just show various levels of like lines, like duplicated lines behind them as you were moving, kind of a ghosting, but it wasn't universal to every single frame. It would just pop in some frames and not in others. And if you looked at Transformer and the CNN model side by side, as I talked about, I think in my original video here back a year ago, they would just kind of trade off which frame you would see this issue in. And now with preset M, this is actually kind of fixed. So you don't see any of those ghosting extra lines behind the power lines when you're moving through the world anymore. And as you can see in this loop I've made, it looks, as a result, I would say more like power lines and less like kind of like staccato-y aliases and stuff like that. In general, though, I would say that this, while it does look better since it doesn't have ghosting in it, it still is aliased, though. Like, it isn't making like perfect, like amazing super sampled lines or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say...
But like it doesn't at least have the ghosts in it, which is kind of one of the things that is distracting alongside the aliasing. So it's better, but it's not like 100% or something like that. For it to be 100%, it would have to be like a perfect line with like perfect anti-aliasing. Another thing that I noted a year back was that Transformer versus the CNN model in a game like Death Stranding, if you like
the rain, right? Yeah, because rain and Kojima go hand in hand. It's always an effect that his games have done amazingly well. And it's true, when using DLSS, that was like the one drawback, is the rain effects they almost didn't disappear, but almost, right? Like you kind of lost the definition on the raindrops.
Yeah, so like in the air itself, the Transformer model versus a super sampled version of that same image, you could easily see that there was less rain in the air that was visible. And also, if you zoomed in onto Sam's backpack, you could see that there's little raindrops in the super sampled image that are kind of hitting his backpack that just aren't there. I think DLSS just doesn't have enough resolution and enough know-how to reconstruct that as like a positive image detail. It's kind of erasing them because they must look like aliasing, I'd assume. Now with the transformer model M, preset M, the rain is more visible in the air. I wouldn't say it's 100% there, like the super sampled image.
I see that.
And also when you zoom into the backpack, the raindrops are still missing. So that is still a bridge too far for DLSS. It can't approach the super sampled image in that aspect, but it is at least better than it was under preset K.
So that kind of gets to general image stability, which is something that wasn't always perfect there. And the first example that you shared here actually is from KCD2. And yesterday you mentioned something about running this game at 16K. So I'm wondering if there's any connection between your random 16K tests and the DLSS testing here. What did you find?
Yeah. Basically, I was looking to see like how stable vegetation is in games, and I looked at a couple of games to test it out. And the general image stability now with preset M, and I was comparing to super sampling for that reason, it is better under the new preset than it was under K. So like here in KCD2, if you look at close vegetation or even distant vegetation with the Transformer K model from 4K DLSS Performance, you can see that if you just kind of like look at the macro image as in a total, you'll see that there's like little like fizzling and there's like little pixels popping in and out of existence occasionally, which just create the appearance of like noise in the image. Preset M doesn't have those in the same areas. And that's in spite of it actually looking a little bit, I would say, sharper overall. So that is one thing that you won't see in KCD2 essentially anymore with the new model. You can see a similar effect actually in Miles Morales, by Spider-Man Miles Morales, where distant building lines, if you zoom in on them, you'll see that they kind of have these sawtooth edges on them, like on the areas like where above windows are, or where windowsills are, or at the, like the top edge of like of a concrete, like outcrop on a building. You'll see that they all have these sawtooth edges that change from frame to frame. And those are gone now with preset M. They complete the lines better. And if you look at the trees in the park and whatnot in Miles Morales, you'll also see that as the camera sways, preset K would cause them to like have pixels popping in and out of existence constantly, which causes a fizzle, versus preset M, which keeps them stable, as well as being a bit sharper.
Okay, so Miles Morales then, it is going to be 6 years old as of this year. So do you feel comfortable saying that people can now officially play the game? Or do we still have to wait for the next revision of DLSS?
I think this is just enough to bring it over the edge to say you can finally play Miles Morales on PC.
All right. You've heard it here first. You have permission from the man himself, Alex Battaglia, that you can now play Miles Morales. Enjoy.
But just before it was completely unplayable. The Outer Worlds 2, a game that is, I would argue, less playable. In that game with preset K, 4K DLSS performance mode, if you looked at vegetation, it had the same fizzling issue, but also like it would arguably maybe like ghost as the same time as fizzling. Like we look at this plant close to the front of the camera here.
This looks more like older DLSS actually at a glance.
It does actually. That's why I was surprised to see it, but there it is. And preset M does that a lot better. It keeps it, I would say, stable. The lines, edges are much better, and there's no semblance of ghosting. So all that stuff looks quite a bit better. Another thing that in terms of image stability that is done better in preset M, and I can find any examples of this, but it's pretty universal, is that particles in a distance, they just tend to resolve better. So you'll see between preset K and preset M here in the Outer Worlds 2, if you look at a distance, you'll see that it looks like there's more particles on the preset M side. And the reason for that is because they're now showing up as more like as they should, versus on the preset K side, they were being kind of swallowed and made to disappear because they appear as aliasing, as well as you may notice that there are less ghosty lines behind the particles at the same time. So it is like attaching, it's like keeping them fuller and better at the same time in the new preset M model, which is a positive. And this applies across all games. I could show probably many examples, but I thought this was a good one here from the Outer Worlds 2.
So this all looks pretty good then, based on what you've shown so far and your video that you shared with me here that the audience should be seeing. So everything's fine and dandy, right? But like there seems to be still some issues with it. So what's going on?
So basically, if you look at rasterized elements of a game, I'd say the preset M does universally, for the most part, a better job. But when you look at ray trace lighting details, which kind of operate on a separate layer, I would say preset M actually shows a number of regressions versus preset K. And so I looked across a number of titles. It's not universal, but it's definitely common enough where I'd consider it an issue. So
and you're talking specifically about the way it handles this in games that don't use ray reconstruction, yes?
Yeah. So this is using whatever denoisers the game has.
That is key. That's key.
And then it's upscaling them.
Okay.
So I looked at the Outer Worlds 2, a game that I think has very noisy lighting at times. And I like, for example, here in this bathroom scene.
Toilet. Or no,
the toilet.
Yes.
Honestly, the sink here, it looks bad in both.
It does.
I didn't see a very big difference. It's very noisy. The ray traced reflection there is very noisy in both 4K DLSS performance mode. It's actually really bad. And diffuse lighting looks much the same in this game. There isn't extra boiling or anything like that. Then I went over to Remedy's Control, one of the first ray trace titles, and it actually doesn't have very complex denoising in general. And here I noticed that surfaces that have like a lot of normal detail on them that are reflective, the preset M would show more noise in them. Preset K already had noise in them, but then there's like more noise now in preset M. Jedi Survivor, on the other hand, is kind of a mixed case. If you look at the reflections in Jedi Survivor on like a body of water, preset K actually resolves them pretty noisily. Preset M now resolves them a lot more stably, which I didn't expect based upon the previous behavior and control. But if you look at ambient occlusion on vegetation, this is something Oliver pointed out with PSSR in his coverage.
Whoa.
It resolves them now in like a kind of, not flashing, but they are like constantly sparkling.
This looks exactly like the problem that every Unreal Engine 5 game has with PSSR.
It actually does.
Right? That's exactly the same problem. What the heck?
We go to another UE5 game, Silent Hill 2. I wanted to look at another Lumen example here. The super coherent water reflections that you can see in the game's intro in the parking lot. They're stable in both, but if you like, the one thing, YouTube is kind of crunching all the detail here, but in person, let me just say, and I'm showing this with the zoom in, the preset M shows that actually that really one stable reflection like we see in preset K is now actually has like little bits of boiling in it, like pixels popping in and out and moving each frame. Whereas preset K looks like almost like a static image. That's how perfect it is. And once again, looking at the ambient occlusion on vegetation as provided by Lumen, like we're showing here, it's flickering in both. Because I wanted to find an example where I knew it was problematic in the K version, but I would say it's flickering even more now in preset M.
This really looks like, this does look like the PS5 version versus the patched version with PSSR implemented.
It does. So Ratchet and Clank here, I wanted to show a title that once again has pretty, I would say, primitive denoising. Train moving here in both, where I'm using the high version of the reflections. Those are the checkerboarded ones they use on PS5. And you'll see there's a lot more noise when the train moves versus preset K in preset M. You can see that. I think it's pretty easy to show in this zoomed in footage. If you look at the ground, even when the camera is not moving and the object isn't moving, you'll just see like a generic boiling kind of in the inner surface detail of that reflection. And if you look at any of the corners or under objects in the game that use the ray trace ambient occlusion that this game has on the PC version, you'll notice that they are kind of noisier. It's a bit subtle, but I hope YouTube shows it here. They are a bit noisier with preset M. They are it's like moving all the time, versus a much more stable look with preset K. And now the one thing that I think is funny about this is that you can see that the ray traced effects are noisier now. But if you look at the ground
yeah, I
in
see
the
it.
same shots. Like the ground in this
grass.
game for some reason is like totally broken. I don't know why. It's broken across all the image upscalers, even their own IGTI. And for some reason, DLSS 4.5 does that a lot better than preset K.
That looks a lot better. Wow, I've never seen it like that.
Yeah, so you can see that it does like rasterize geo well in their edges, but the inside, like the internal detail that's brought about by stuff like ray tracing, it looks worse, I would say, in preset M. And I went through a couple other titles. Crysis 3 Remastered, I was just curious, like that game uses strange ray tracing. It's like slightly noisier in preset M. And then I looked finally at Cyberpunk 2077 with ray tracing and specifically looking at the reflections. And you can kind of see what's going on here, I think, really well. That with preset K, it's kind of a bit muddled and fuzzy, the reflection that's showing there, but it is, rather constant frame to frame. Maybe there's a little bit of ghosting with the camera bobbing. But with preset M, you can see that like the hard, like aliased pixel edges inside the reflection, and it has a lot more like noise from frame to frame. It looks less stable as a result, I would say, to the eye. So in general, it looks like preset M. It's not across every single title. There were some deviations as I showed here, but I would say in general, its handling of ray tracing noise is less elegant than preset K, and it's really hard to know if it's showing the denoising step more that is happening beforehand, or if it's denoising less than before, or if this is something where it's just not lining up anymore. But it does, I would say, on average, look worse for these effects.
It really shows how delicate this sort of thing truly is, right?
Yeah.
To regress in such a specific way. Hopefully they can address that. But
yeah,
that's not the. There's actually a couple of other things I wanted to ask about this, because I mentioned the sharpening earlier, but I also noticed in a couple of these shots there seemed to be a slight difference in brightness.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
The way it interacts with tone mapping is slightly different now. The auto exposure function in DLSS is turned on per default when you force model preset M in any game. And in some games, this doesn't really affect anything in terms of image brightness or anything like that. But in some titles, it does have a slight effect. Like in Horizon Forbidden West, I think if you look at these two images side by side, one is arguably slightly less saturated than the other, I would argue. And I think the preset K looks a little bit more saturated than preset M. And if you look in the Outer Worlds 2, if you look at the stars, you can kind of see that with preset M, the stars are, they're not brighter, but like the punctual part of the star gets like a little bit like a whiter color than like kind of an over averaged grayer color in the preset K. So that's the difference between them two. In some titles, you'll see that some aspects of lighting approach white more than some less white color, to say the least, is the way I would describe it. It didn't happen universally across all the titles here, but it could be noticeable at times. And this is due to the auto exposure function, I believe.
I don't know. That's weird. I need to see more of that myself. But the thing that stood out to me in a lot of these comparisons, actually, and I've heard other people complain about this as well, and it's this sharpness. So now this has been a problem that's been kind of off and on throughout the history of DLSS, where sometimes you get this over sharpened look. I feel like it was that way very early on, and then I feel like we saw this again during the DLSS 3 era, and then 4 comes along and mostly cleans that up, and now it feels like I'm seeing this artificial sharpening return. So like, what the heck is going on? How many games did you see this in, and is there any way to fix it?
So I think this is a dependent on title thing, and I think it isn't universal behavior of this new 4.5 model. And the reason why I say that is because you can find examples where it is the opposite, technically, where it doesn't look nearly as sharp on certain screen elements. But to say the least, I just want to say that, for example, we look here, what sharpness is correct is a question in its own right. And this is why I bring in KCD2, because I did the game's SMAA2TX versus the preset K versus preset M, and then versus hardcore super sampling, which can either run at 60 FPS or 5 FPS, depending on how much you super sampling in. And, there you can see that the preset M, for example, next to SMMA2TX, it is sharper than the 4K native presentation with TAA. But if you compare it to SSAA, that is a lot sharper than both of them, like quite a great deal sharper. And I just wanted the reason why I want to show this example here is to show that the level of sharpness doesn't imply correctness necessarily always, because the higher, sometimes the more super sampling you get, the sharper an image gets. Or as we can see here, between 4 times SSAA and 16 times SSAA, actually 16 times SSAA is less sharp, but it has better anti-aliasing. It's just a funny, it's a sliding curve, and it's very, one isn't objectively better than the other necessarily always in terms of sharpness. Now, that's just to complicate the sharpness question in general. I just want to say, just because something's sharper doesn't mean it's better or worse.
Yeah. It's just for me, it's really just the ringing artifacts that occur where sharpness, artificial sharpness is added, right?
Yeah. So now this comes into the second part, where some games appear to have a default sharpness pre-anti-aliasing that may be on in a number of titles per default and may not be able to be turned off at all, is one thing I've found. So if you look at Spider-Man, for example, when you boot that game up, it actually defaults to having a sharpening slider set up that you have to turn down. And it is not related to any sort of specific TAA sharpening. The game just has sharpness on by default. It does this on console and it does this on PC. But if you put both of those together next to each other, you can see that preset model M by default with this sharpening slider up looks really atrocious. It looks really like ringed and ugly. And I've also kind of am under the appreciation that this applies to Horizon Forbidden West. It applies to a number of the Sony ports. There may be a sharpening behind the scenes that the user doesn't have control over. Another thing that I've noticed is that there isn't a difference in sharpening sometimes, but sometimes the lack of ghosting and or the reproduction of thin details being more accurate to a degree leads to more aliasing. And a good example of this can be seen in Silent Hill 2. But basically the trees in the background moving here, if you were to stop the image and you look at the trees in preset K, you'd see that the thin features are kind of, they're both like an average color of the sky behind it and the color of the branches themselves. So it's like a gray tone, a median tone. It's basically like semi-transparent almost looking. The preset M, on the other hand, detail of the trees is dark, and in movement, because it's holding that silhouette better instead of being some sort of median value, like a gray value or a semi-transparent value or something like that, it actually looks a lot more aliased. It's not transparent anymore. I don't know how to explain it better, but basically, like, if something has a ghost in it, it doesn't have as much aliasing because you're seeing the previous frame in the current frame. That's why motion blur works. But that's one thing you can see in preset M in a couple of titles. I also think it's happening in Horizon Forbidden West, where if you look at some vegetation moving, you'll see that it has more aliasing in motion sometimes. The thin feature details of that presentation. It is a per title thing, it appears, which isn't great because you want just universally better things across the board. But it's also like I said earlier, like you see more aliasing in the trees in Silent Hill 2, but then you go over to KCD2 and the trees have less aliasing with preset.
KCD2, by the way, the foliage just looks awesome in that game. I really can't get over it. I actually started playing that over the holidays, and it's beautiful. I mean, CryEngine foliage, that's what it does, but still.
Yeah, it's really excellent, and that is one of the areas where preset M shines. So altogether, there's a lot of positive aspects, and there's also some negative ones, which I hope can be iterated on, kind of like when we looked at any other one of these DLSS things. We hope that iteration in the future can increase the quality. The question then becomes, like, is it worth the performance cost, right?
Right, so what do we got here? It looks like I'm looking at your performance testing here, and it does seem to be heavier, but how much heavier seems to be dependent heavily upon the graphics card you're using.
Yeah, so here's the game. Here I'm looking at Cyberpunk 2077 4K DLSS performance mode, just the rasterization settings on between 3 different GPUs. And here you'll see that if you have the percentages with the RTX 3070 as a base versus the RTX 4060 Ti and the RTX 5060, you'll see that the RTX 3070 running preset K has the highest level of performance when set as the base. It's like 100%. The 4060 Ti is around 86.3% performance of that. And the 5060 is roughly the same performance as the 3070, just a bit below. It's like 99.4% of the 3070. That's running with preset K. Preset M, DLSS 4.5, is heavier. When we run those tests, as you see here, the numbers change quite dramatically. With the RTX 3070 set as the base, it's 100% again, but now the 4060 Ti is 98.8% of that performance. And the RTX 5060 is 116% of that performance. So what this means is that the hit to performance to turning on preset M is much higher the older your RTX graphics card is. With the RTX 3070, turning on preset M decreases performance by 18.4%, with the RTX 4060 Ti by 6.6%, and the 5060 by just 4.8%. If you were to look at the millisecond numbers that it is adding per frame, for this, the RTX 3070 is running the preset M about 4 times slower than the RTX 5060. So tensor cores that are less capable have a greater frame time cost for using preset M, and that shows the older your RTX graphics card is. So turning it on is a lot cheaper on a modern RTX like Blackwell or Ada Lovelace card, but it's a lot more expensive on an Ampere and presumably Turing card. So whether you want to use it is actually a lot more up to if you think the image quality benefits or losses are worth it. And at the moment, I would say on like a Blackwell card or an Ada Lovelace card, I would say you should end up using it in a game that doesn't have any ray tracing. Use it. But if a game has ray tracing, I would say maybe do some back and forths for yourself at the moment to see if the added noise that could potentially be there is worth the slightly higher cost, like depending upon what image quality benefits you like. I think that is not such a great end statement regarding DLSS 4.5, because it would be great if I could just sit here and talk about only the positives over and over again, but there are some regressions here, and that makes choosing it more of an individual title per title question.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the case, and thankfully you can choose, which is key. They do not eliminate prior versions with these updates, but you're right, it's the results are definitely mixed, and it seems like something you kind of got to fiddle with on your own to determine whether you like the results or not, whether there's ray tracing included or not, that sort of thing. But that's a lot of good information.
Yeah, and another thing, like once again, at the end here, you have control over it in the Nvidia app. The new recommended setting is pretty interesting because it turns on preset M when you just have DLSS performance mode on, but then uses K when you use balanced or quality mode, and then switches to L, which I didn't even talk about in this video, when you use ultra performance mode. So Nvidia is offering like some new ways to use DLSS along with just blankly supporting it across any title you really want. And if it doesn't work on an individual title basis, you can always just go to the global control panel area of the Nvidia app and force it there globally. For some reason, the individual profile didn't work. I found that happening in like older games when I forced it in something like Crysis 3 Remastered. So that's kind of the end of this. One thing I wish that was more universally available is games did not include stock sharpening that you can adjust. Right. I realized it when making this video. I was like, man, that isn't that great in the games where it did show up. So if you find preset M being a bit too sharp for your liking, definitely try and make sure like the title has the ability to turn off sharpening.
All right. Well, thanks for breaking all that down, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, John, for joining me.
You're welcome.
I really enjoy someone asking me questions about my work because it means I have to script a lot less stuff. But John, thank you for joining me.
Of course.
Yeah, and if you did enjoy this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, follow on social media, help us out on Patreon. Am I forgetting anything, John?
No, I think you got it.
Okay. And this is John and Alex saying, Auf Wiedersehen.
And sponsored by Alex. I don't know.